The soaked German shepherd shoved the bedroom door open with her nose, dragging a heavy plaid blanket across the hardwood floor, and Nora Whitlock froze in the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth. Willow's paws were bleeding, her fur crusted with ice, and she was carrying that blanket like it was the last warm thing left in the world, straight to the old woman dying in the back bedroom. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments what corner of the world you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you won't miss stories like this one. Rain had been hammering the tin roof of the little clapboard house on Sycamore Lane for 2 straight days, and Nora had barely closed her eyes since Wednesday. She stood there in her old flannel shirt and bare feet, watching the dog she barely knew climb onto her grandmother's bed as if she had been doing it every night of her life. Louise Ackerman did not stir. She was 89 years old, her lips the color of old paper, her breath so shallow that Nora had to lean close every few minutes just to make sure it was still there. The clinic doctor from Millbrook had come and gone that afternoon, and his words still sat in Nora's chest like a wet stone. Keep her warm, keep her comfortable, call me if she stops eating. Louise had stopped eating 2 days ago. Willow settled herself against the old woman's side, laid the plaid wool blanket across Louise's chest with a slow, deliberate push of her long nose, and then rested her head just above Louise's heart. And for the first time in nearly a week, Louise's mouth twitched into something that was almost a smile. Her thin fingers, all bone and paper skin, drifted up from beneath the quilt and found the wet fur of the dog's neck. She whispered something so soft that Nora had to hold her breath to hear it. "There's my girl," Louise said. Nora sank down onto the doorframe and cried without making a sound. She did not know, standing there in the dim yellow light of the bedside lamp, that the dog on her grandmother's bed was about to unravel a secret 51 years old, drag it into the light, and change every single thing Nora Whitlock thought she knew about her own family. She did not know that the plaid blanket she was staring at, soaked with freezing rain and reeking of cedar, had been carried through the storm for a reason that no one had ever put into words. She did not know that in 3 days, a black sedan she had never seen before would come skidding up the muddy driveway on Sycamore Lane, and that the man who stepped out of it would try to take everything her grandmother had left in the world. She only knew in that moment that Louise was smiling for the first time in days, and that the dog had come from somewhere across the field in the middle of the worst storm of the season, carrying that ridiculous, heavy, soaked blanket like it was the most important thing anyone had ever carried. Willow was not Louise's dog. She belonged to the neighbor across the north field, a widowed carpenter named Bo Hensley, who had raised her from a pup with a bottle after his wife Marlene passed of a stroke 3 winters back. Bo was a quiet, careful man in his late 40s, with sawdust always in the cuff of his jeans and a soft way of tipping his hat when he passed on the road. Willow had been his shadow for 4 years. She rode in the truck to the lumber yard. She slept in the shop while he sanded cabinets. She never wandered until 6 months ago. That was the spring Nora had moved down from Chattanooga to take care of her grandmother, giving up her apartment and her diner job and the whole shape of her life without so much as a second thought. She had lost her mother young, a car accident on a slick road when Nora was 15, and Louise had been the one who braided her hair for her first day of school, the one who taught her to bait a hook in the pond behind the barn, the one who came sitting up all night in the emergency room the summer Nora broke her wrist falling off the fence. So when the county nurse called and said Louise was falling and could not be trusted with the stove anymore, Nora packed 2 suitcases and drove all night down Highway 75 in the rain and never once thought of turning back. That was also the spring Willow started slipping through the loose fence board every morning at exactly 7 and trotting across the wet grass to the porch, where Louise would already be waiting in the old wicker rocking chair with a warm biscuit balanced on her knee. Louise had lost most of her hearing and half her sight, but somehow, always, she knew the exact moment the dog set foot on the yard. She would tilt her chin up, smile at nothing Nora could see, and say the same soft words. "There's my girl." Bo had been mortified the first time he came looking for the dog. He had stood on the porch twisting his cap in his hands, apologizing so hard he could barely get the sentences out, promising to fix the fence that afternoon. Louise had reached up with her small, wrinkled hand, taken his big carpenter's fingers in hers, and told him very calmly to leave the fence alone. "The girl knows where she needs to be," Louise had said. "Let her be." Bo had stared down at her for a long moment. Something had moved in his face that neither Nora nor Louise saw clearly. Then he had nodded once, put his cap back on, and walked home across the field with his shoulders unusually straight. He had never fixed the fence. Now, on the second night of the storm, with the wind ripping at the shutters and the pear tree in the side yard groaning like something alive, Nora sat on the edge of Louise's bed and tried to work out how the dog had crossed 300 yards of open field in the freezing rain, opened the mudroom door that always stuck in wet weather, and found her way to this exact room. There was no logical way. Willow had never been inside the house before. Louise always sat with her on the porch. The mudroom door had a knob that turned the wrong way and stuck against the frame. Even Nora sometimes had to shove it with her hip, and yet the dog was here, wet and shivering and utterly still. Her long body pressed the full length of Louise's side, and the plaid blanket she had dragged through the storm was steaming faintly under the lamp as it began to dry against the old woman's chest. Nora reached out and touched the blanket. It was heavier than it looked, old wool, hand-stitched at the edges, smelling of cedar and rain and dog and something faintly sweet, like pipe tobacco from another decade. She recognized it. It was the blanket Bo kept folded in a basket by his back door. She had seen it a dozen times when she went over to borrow eggs or drop off tomatoes. It had a peculiar green and red plaid, faded almost to grey at the corners, and Bo never let it out of the mudroom. Willow had carried it 300 yards through a storm. Nora did not sleep that night. She sat in the wooden chair by the bed and watched the dog watch her grandmother, and she thought about how tomorrow morning Bo would come looking for Willow, and she would have to give her back, and Louise would smile that small, terrible smile of hers, and Willow would have to walk out that door, and everything would be exactly as bleak as it had been the day before. That was not what happened. Bo arrived at first light, his rain slicker dripping on the porch boards, his cap in his hands as always. Nora let him in through the kitchen and put coffee on. He asked after Louise, gently, the way he had been asking every couple of days since the doctor's last visit. Nora told him the truth. Bo nodded once, took his boots off carefully so as not to track mud, and followed her down the narrow hall to the back bedroom. He stopped in the doorway. Willow lifted her head to look at him, just once. Then she laid it back down against Louise's chest and closed her amber eyes and did not move again. Bo stood there for a long time without speaking. Nora watched his face carefully, and she saw something come apart behind his eyes. Not sadness, exactly, though there was plenty of that, but a kind of recognition, like a man who had been waiting his whole life for a piece of news he could not quite name. He took a step into the room. He did not go close to the bed. He simply stood there, and he looked at that plaid blanket the way a person looks at a face they have not seen in 50 years. And Nora saw his throat work once, hard. "Ma'am," he said finally, softly, to no one in particular. "You come on home when you're ready, all right?" Willow did not move. Bo turned to Nora. "She'll come home when she comes home. You mind if she stays?" Nora blinked. "You mean tonight?" "I mean however long," Bo said. Nora could not speak. She nodded once. Bo reached into the pocket of his rain slicker and pulled out a folded paper napkin. Inside was a small wedge of pot roast from his own supper the night before, wrapped carefully in wax paper. He handed it to Nora and asked very quietly if she would offer it to Willow later, and if Willow would not eat it, to just leave it on the floor by the bed. Then he tipped his cap and walked back out into the grey morning. Willow did not eat the pot roast. By evening, the doctor was back. He listened to Louise's heart for a long time with his cold, silver stethoscope, then straightened up and stepped out into the hall with Nora. His name was Dr. Emmett Harlow, and he had been Louise's doctor since Nora was in grade school. He was a tired, gentle man with a wife in Millbrook and 2 grown boys in the army. "Nora, honey," he said, "her heart is giving out. Lungs are filling. It's a matter of days now, maybe less. I'm sorry." Nora nodded. She was too tired to cry. "That dog," Dr. Harlow said carefully, glancing back into the room. "That's Bo Hensley's shepherd, ain't it?" "Yes, sir." "Bo knows she's here?" "He said she can stay." Dr. Harlow was quiet for a long moment. He rubbed the back of his neck. Then he said something Nora did not expect at all. He said, "That's a mercy, Nora. That is a real mercy. You know your grandmother nursed Bo's mama the winter Bo's mama died. I don't know if you knew that." Nora shook her head slowly. She had not known. 1964, that would have been, in one of the rented rooms above the old pharmacy on Main Street. Bo was maybe 8, 9 years old. Louise was a young nurse then, worked private. She sat up with that woman 4 nights straight. Wouldn't leave, wouldn't take money for it either. Dr. Harlow shook his head slowly. "Your grandmother is a saint, Nora. I have never in 50 years of practicing medicine met a soul like her. That dog knows something we don't. You let her stay as long as she wants." He tipped his hat and walked out into the wet twilight. Nora sank down onto the kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator and cried for the first time in 3 days. That night, Bo came back at 9. He had a bag of dry dog food and a stainless steel bowl and a soft blue towel that he laid at the foot of the bed. He crouched down beside Willow and rubbed her wet ears, and he murmured something in her ear that Nora could not quite hear. Willow licked his hand once, very slowly, and then turned her face back to Louise. Bo stood up, wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist, and asked Nora if he could have that cup of coffee she had offered that morning. They sat at the kitchen table under the yellow ceiling light while the rain kept coming down. Bo turned the chipped mug slowly in his big, calloused hands. He did not look at Nora when he finally started to speak. "I ever tell you how I knew your grandma?" he said. "Dr. Harlow told me some of it this afternoon." Bo nodded slowly. "Reckon I owe you the whole of it, then. It don't feel right sitting here drinking her coffee while she's lying in there, and you not knowing." Nora waited. "I was 9 years old," Bo said, "living with my mama in a room above Dillard's pharmacy on Main Street in Millbrook. Just the 2 of us. My daddy took off the summer before, hopped a freight train out of the county, and never wrote a single letter, not one. And my mama had a job cleaning at the elementary school. She got sick in November, some kind of pneumonia. Doctor came once, said there wasn't much to be done for it, gave her some pills, and never came back. We didn't have the money for the hospital. My mama couldn't work, and after 2 weeks the landlord came around asking after rent, and she didn't have it, and she just cried and cried in the corner of that room, and I didn't know what to do." He paused. He turned the mug all the way around once. Outside, the rain kept whispering against the tin roof. "A young woman came up the stairs on the 4th night," he said. "She had a lantern and a canvas bag. She said her name was Louise Ackerman, and she was a private nurse. And somebody at the pharmacy had mentioned to her that there was a woman upstairs who was very sick and a little boy who was scared. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for anything. She just came in and put her hand on my mama's forehead and started boiling water and making broth on that little hot plate we had. She sat up with my mama for 3 nights straight. She fed me toast with butter and told me stories about her father's farm out on Sycamore Lane. She wrapped me in a blanket she'd brought with her." And here Bo's voice broke, just slightly. "A blanket her own grandmother had stitched plaid wool real heavy. She wrapped me in it and told me I was not alone in the world and that I would never be alone in the world, not while she had breath in her body. Nora's mouth had gone dry. My mama died on the morning of the 4th day, Bo said. Louise was holding her hand. She washed my mama's face and combed her hair before she called the undertaker. Then she took me down the stairs to the pharmacy and she called around until she found my mama's cousin over in Cleveland who would take me in. She packed me a bag of biscuits she'd baked in her own kitchen and she put me on the westbound bus. And she stood on the platform and waved at me until the bus turned the corner. And I never saw her again for 31 years, until I bought the field across from her farmhouse in 1995 and moved out here with Marlene. Nora was gripping the edge of the table. You mean to tell me she never said a word, Bo said. First time I saw her at the mailbox, I was so shook I couldn't say hello. She just tipped her head and smiled at me, and I could tell she remembered. But she never brought it up. Not once in 30 years. She let it be my story to tell if I wanted to tell it, and I never did, and she never pushed. He took a long, careful sip of his coffee. The blanket Willow brought over tonight, he said quietly, is the one Louise wrapped me in that winter. She left it with me when she put me on the bus. Told me to keep it, said her grandmother would want it going to somebody who needed it. It's been in a basket by my back door for 51 years, Nora. Marlene knew what it was. She never let anybody sit on it, not even the grandkids when they came to visit. And that dog... He stopped. He shook his head. He looked for a moment like a man who had seen something impossible and was still deciding whether to believe it. That dog somehow knew tonight that it was the right thing to bring. Nora sat there with her hand over her mouth. She thought of Willow crossing the field in the storm, teeth clamped on that plaid wool, dragging it 300 yards through the freezing rain to lay it back down on the chest of the woman who had first wrapped a scared little boy in it 51 years ago. She did not know how the dog had known. She would never know, but she was not going to argue with it. They sat together until almost midnight, Bo and Nora heard the rest, how Marlene had died the second Christmas after they moved out to Sycamore Lane, how Bo had gone almost silent for a year and then slowly come back to himself, how Willow had been born in the middle of a January snow to a shepherd bitch a friend of Bo's owned over in Athens, how Bo had driven 6 hours through the storm to pick her out because he could not bear another night alone in that house. He said all of it in a soft, even voice, and Nora understood for the first time that Bo Hensley had known grief the way most people knew their own front porch, and that Louise had known him from the very first hour of it. When he finally stood up to go, he paused at the door. "I'll be back at dawn," he said. "Don't you let anybody in this house you don't know. Storm like this brings out strange folks." Nora nodded. She locked the door behind him. She checked on Louise. Willow was still there, unmoving, the plaid blanket a dark shape against the pale quilt. Then she went into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and finally allowed herself to cry the way she had not cried since her mother died. The black sedan came up the driveway just after 10 the next morning. Nora heard it before she saw it, the crunch of expensive tires on wet gravel, the polite little chime of a car door opening and closing with money behind it. She was in the kitchen washing out Bo's coffee mug. She stepped to the window and pushed aside the yellow curtain and felt her stomach drop straight through the floorboards. She had not seen the man walking up the porch steps in 11 years, but she recognized him instantly. Uncle Randall, Louise's only son, Nora's mother's older brother, the one who had walked out of the family fight over Grandpa's estate back when Nora was 21 and had not been back since. He had gotten thinner and grayer, and he was wearing a wool overcoat that probably cost more than Nora's car, but the tight, hungry line of his mouth was exactly the same. He knocked. Willow, in the back bedroom, did not stir. Nora opened the door. Randall Ackerman looked her up and down. Then he smiled the small, careful smile that Nora remembered from her childhood, the one that never touched his eyes. He said, "Nora, honey, it's been a long time." She did not smile back. "How did you know she was sick?" Nora said. "Dr. Harlow's daughter is a paralegal at my firm in Nashville," Randall said. "She mentioned it in passing last week. I came as fast as I could." Nora almost laughed. Dr. Harlow's daughter was a paralegal in Nashville, and Randall had come as fast as he could. That was going to be the shape of every sentence out of his mouth from now on. Perfectly true. Perfectly slanted. She let him in. There was nothing else to do. He would not go into the back bedroom. He said he did not want to disturb Mama, though the truth, Nora suspected, was that he did not want to look at her. He sat at the kitchen table instead and asked very gently whether Louise had left any papers with Nora, any documents, any envelopes, any little metal box. Nora said she had not. "You know how your grandmother is," Randall said. "Never trusted banks. Kept everything in shoeboxes. If there's a will, honey, we need to find it before anything happens. Otherwise it all gets tied up in probate for years, and neither of us wants that." Nora looked at him for a long, quiet moment. There was no we. There had never been a we. She said carefully, "I haven't looked. Would you mind if I did?" "Yes," Nora said. "I would mind." Randall's smile did not falter, but something behind it went cold. He nodded slowly and stood up and said he would be staying at the Millbrook Inn for a few days, and he hoped she would reconsider. On his way out, he paused at the door and looked down the hallway toward the back bedroom. "Whose dog is that?" he said. "A neighbor's. Is it safe? With Mama, I mean." "She's the safest thing in this house right now," Nora said. "Have a good day, Uncle Randall." She shut the door behind him and locked it. She did not sleep that night either. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and thought about all the shoe boxes in her grandmother's closet, and the sewing box under the bed, and the coffee tin on top of the refrigerator that Nora had never opened because it did not seem like her business. She thought about how Louise had raised Randall alone after Grandpa's stroke back in the 70s, and how Randall had left for law school in Knoxville the fall he turned 18 and had only come back 4 times in the following 40 years. She thought about how Nora's own mother, Randall's little sister, had married a mechanic from Chattanooga and moved north, and how the family had split like a piece of wet wood along a crack that nobody had ever tried to patch. She thought about the way Randall's eyes had flicked toward the back bedroom, cool and appraising, as if he were sizing up a stranger's furniture at an estate sale. Around 3 in the morning, Nora got up and went into her grandmother's bedroom closet and started looking. She did not find a will, but she did find, on the top shelf, behind a stack of folded pillowcases, a coffee tin with the words Maxwell House printed in faded red across the side. Inside the tin, held together with an old rubber band, was a bundle of envelopes, each one addressed in her grandmother's careful, slanted handwriting to a name she had never seen written before. The name on every single envelope was "For the boy from the rented room." Nora sat down on the closet floor with the tin in her lap and stared at those envelopes for a long time. Then, slowly, carefully, she opened the top one. Inside was a stack of small bills, mostly 1s and 5s, a few 10s, held with a paper clip, and a note, written in her grandmother's hand, dated the 15th of November, 1965. The note said, "For Beau, when he needs it." She had signed it, simply, L. The envelope beneath that one was dated a year later. Same words, same signature, same small stack of bills saved out of a private nurse's salary from over half a century ago. There was one for every 15th of November, without exception, from 1965 all the way through last year. 51 envelopes. In one, dated 1973, Louise had added a single sentence in the note, "I hope your teachers are kind." In another, from 1981, she had written, "I hope you have found a girl worth keeping. In one from 1994, the year before Bo moved onto the field across from her house. "I dreamed of you last night. You were building something with your own two hands." That felt right. Louise had been talking to him for 51 years and had never once put a stamp on an envelope. Nora sat there on the closet floor and pressed her fingers against her mouth and understood, for the first time in her whole grown-up life, exactly what kind of woman her grandmother was. Then from the back bedroom she heard Willow whine very softly. Just once. She dropped the tin, ran down the hall, and threw open the door. Louise was awake. The old woman's eyes were open and clear in a way they had not been for weeks. She was looking at the ceiling. Her thin hand was buried in the fur of Willow's neck. She turned her head slowly when Nora came in, and she smiled, and she said, in a voice so weak Nora had to kneel by the bed to hear her, "Baby, come here." Nora took her grandmother's other hand. "You found it," Louise said. Nora's throat closed. "How did you—" "Heard you crying on the floor of the closet." Louise's smile grew, just faintly. Not deaf enough to miss that. "Grandma, why didn't you ever give it to him?" Louise closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. Then she opened them again. "Wasn't ever mine to give while I was alive," she said. "It was his the whole time. I just held it for him. He wasn't ready to hear it. Now he is. He's here, Grandma. Bo's here every day. He's letting Willow stay with you." "I know, baby." Louise's fingers tightened weakly on Willow's fur. "I know. She came home." Nora did not know what that last sentence meant. She would not know for another 2 days. Louise closed her eyes and drifted back down into whatever place she had been living in for the last week. Her breathing evened out into that slow, papery rhythm. Willow lay very, very still. Nora stayed on the floor by the bed until the sun came up, and outside the window the rain finally began to slacken into a soft, cold mist. The rain quit at dawn, and by 9 that morning Randall was back on the porch. He was not alone this time. There was a woman standing at his shoulder, tall, silver-haired, in a camel-colored coat, with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Randall introduced her as Miss Delia Vance, a colleague from his firm. Miss Vance smiled tightly at Nora and asked whether she might have a few moments of Nora's time regarding the family situation. Nora let them in. She did not offer coffee. Randall came to the point faster than Nora expected. He said that he had been thinking about it all night, and he was concerned, terribly concerned, he said twice, about the level of care his mother was receiving. He said the county clinic doctor was a good man, but not a specialist. He said there was a wonderful facility in Nashville, a hospice with private rooms, and he had already put a hold on a bed there. He said the ambulance could be at the house by 3 that afternoon. Nora stared at him. "Uncle Randall," she said very carefully, "the doctor says she has days, maybe less. She's dying in her own bed with her own quilt and her own window and a dog she loves at her side. You want to put her in an ambulance and drive her 3 hours through the mountains to a facility she has never seen in her life for her comfort," Randall said, "for proper end-of-life care. She's comfortable here." "Nora, honey, don't," Nora said. Miss Vance opened her leather portfolio and slid a stapled document across the kitchen table. She said, in a professionally kind voice, that Randall had filed a petition in Davidson County the previous afternoon, requesting that he be appointed his mother's temporary medical guardian on grounds of concern about her current caretaker's ability to provide adequate care. She said there would be a hearing on Monday. She said the judge would very likely grant the petition, and that between now and then, it would be in everyone's best interest if Nora would voluntarily allow Louise to be transported to the Nashville facility. "It would look better," Miss Vance said at the hearing. "If they had to do it by court order, Nora's fitness as a caretaker would inevitably come up. Nora had been out of work for 6 months. Nora had unpaid medical bills from a hospital stay 2 winters ago. Nora had a citation for driving on an expired license in Chattanooga in 2017. It would look, Miss Vance said kindly, unfortunate. Nora looked at the stapled document. She looked at Randall. She looked at the door of the back bedroom, where her grandmother was sleeping, and where a German shepherd was lying with her long body pressed against a dying woman's side. She thought about Louise's voice from 3 hours ago, saying she came home. Then Nora very slowly picked up the stapled document, folded it in half, tore it once down the middle, and slid the pieces back across the table to Miss Vance. "Get out of my house," she said. Randall's face went white. Miss Vance stood up smoothly and thanked Nora for her time and told Randall they should go. As Randall was pulling on his overcoat at the door, he paused and turned back and said, in a voice pitched low so Nora would have to strain, "You should have kept the paperwork, Nora. Monday will come whether you want it to or not." Then he was gone. Nora stood at the closed door for a full minute. She was shaking so hard she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then she walked to the phone in the hallway, and with hands that would not stop trembling, she called Beau. He was on her porch in 6 minutes. They sat at the kitchen table, and Nora told him everything: the coffee tin, the 51 envelopes, Randall's petition, the woman with the portfolio, the hearing on Monday. Beau listened with his cap in his hands and his eyes on the floor, and did not interrupt her once. When she was done, he looked up. His face was very still. "Nora," he said, "I need you to show me those envelopes." She brought the tin down from the closet. She set it in front of him. She said, "I don't know what to do with them, Beau. I don't know what to do with any of this." He opened the tin. He picked up the top envelope. He read the name written on the front. "For the boy from the rented room," and Nora watched a 50-year-old man crumple slowly in her grandmother's kitchen chair. He set the envelope down very carefully, like it was made of glass. He covered his face with both of his big, calloused hands. And he cried without making a sound, the kind of crying a person does when they have been holding a thing in for so long that they no longer have language for it. Nora put her hand on his shoulder and did not say a word. When Beau finally looked up, his face was wet and his voice was hoarse and his eyes were very, very clear. "Monday," he said. "You said the hearing is Monday?" "Yes." "All right." He wiped his face on his sleeve. He stood up. He looked at Nora, and Nora saw something she had never seen in Beau Hensley before, which was the flat, quiet anger of a man who had decided something. "You go sit with your grandma. Give her some water on a spoon if she'll take it. Rub her feet with the lotion in the little pink jar on the dresser. It helps. Don't let Willow off that bed for anything, and don't answer that door for anybody but me or Dr. Harlow until I get back. All right? Where are you going?" "To see a lawyer I know in Millbrook," Beau said. "Man named Cyrus Lattimore. He was my daddy's lawyer once, a long time ago, and Louise's too, I think. I'm going to find out what she left, and I'm going to find out how to stop your uncle." He picked up his cap. He paused at the door. He turned back. "Nora," he said, "I ain't touching that money in that tin, not $1 of it. That was hers, and I don't care what she wrote on those envelopes. Whatever needs paying to keep this house yours, I'll pay it out of my own pocket. I'm doing this because she saved my life once, and I never got to say thank you. You understand me?" Nora nodded. She could not speak. Beau walked out to his truck, and the old Ford started on the second try, and he backed down the muddy driveway on Sycamore Lane and disappeared toward town. Nora sat with her grandmother for the rest of the afternoon. Louise did not wake again. Willow did not move. The rain, which had let up in the morning, started again around lunchtime, softer now, more of a whisper against the roof than a hammering. Nora dabbed her grandmother's dry lips with a wet cloth and rubbed lotion into her feet and read aloud from the little brown Psalms book that had lived on the nightstand since Nora was old enough to remember. She did not know if Louise could hear her. She read anyway. Her voice cracked on the 4th Psalm and again on the 23rd, and she pressed on. Bo came back at 5. He was still wearing his cap. His face was the same flat, quiet color it had been when he left. He set a manila folder on the kitchen table and told Nora to sit down. He said, "Cyrus Lattimore drew up a will for your grandma in the summer of 2011. It's on file with the county probate court in Millbrook. He's the executor." Nora waited. Her house on Sycamore Lane and the 18 acres it sits on and the mineral rights on that land go to you, Nora. Free and clear. There is a life estate provision that would have let Randall live here if he needed to, but he waived it in writing back in 2011 in exchange for a cash payment of $22,000, which he took. The waiver is on file. He signed it in front of 2 witnesses and a notary. It is airtight. Nora's hands went cold. "There's also," Bo said, "a scholarship trust set up by your grandma at the community college in Millbrook in 1969, named for a woman by the name of Ruth Hensley. That was my mother. Louise put $5 into it every month for 56 years, and every so often, when she came into a little extra, a good tax refund, a bonus at the hospital, she put in more. It's got a little over $41,000 in it right now. The scholarship is for kids from Millbrook who have lost a parent and want to go into nursing. Louise put my mother's name on it, Nora, 56 years ago, and she never told a single living soul." Nora set her forehead down on the kitchen table and cried like a child. Bo put his big warm hand on the back of her neck and let her cry. When she could breathe again, he said, "One more thing." She looked up. "Cyrus Lattimore was already at the courthouse this morning, filing a response to your uncle's petition. He's known Louise for 40 years, Nora. He is not amused. He said to tell you that Monday's hearing is going to be very short, and that your uncle's lawyer, when he sees what Cyrus filed, is going to have some hard conversations with a certain judge over in Nashville about wasting the court's time." Nora laughed. It came out watery and cracked. She said, "Bo, why is Randall doing this? He waived his claim. He signed. He got paid." Bo's face went still again. "That," he said, "I don't know yet, but I mean to find out." He did not have to wait long. The knock came at 7 that night. Nora, expecting Dr. Harlow, opened the door without checking and found the silver-haired woman from that morning, Miss Delia Vance, standing on the porch alone. No portfolio, no overcoat. She was wearing a soft grey sweater and jeans, and her eyes, which had been so professional and cool at 10 in the morning, were tired and troubled at 7 at night. She said, "Miss Whitlock, may I come in?" "Not on Mr. Ackerman's behalf, on my own." Nora hesitated. Then she stepped back. Miss Vance came inside. She did not sit down. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and looked at the coffee tin on the table, and the manila folder next to it, and the plaid blanket she could just glimpse through the open door of the back bedroom, and something in her face went soft in a way it had not been at 10 in the morning. She said, "I owe you an apology, and I owe your grandmother a bigger one, and I am not going to sleep tonight if I don't say what I came to say." Nora waited. "I am not a colleague of Mr. Ackerman's," Miss Vance said. "I am his estranged wife. We have been separated for 8 months. I am also, for my sins, a paralegal, which is why he called me. He told me he needed help settling his mother's affairs before she passed. He told me his mother had been abandoned in a shack in the mountains by an unfit granddaughter. He told me a lot of things this morning that I have spent the entire afternoon confirming on my own laptop at the Millbrook Inn, and none of them are true. Your grandmother is not in a shack. You are not unfit, and Randall does not want his mother moved for her comfort." Nora sank down onto the kitchen chair. "Then why?" Miss Vance folded her hands in front of her. Randall is in serious financial trouble, Miss Whitlock. He borrowed heavily against a business venture 2 years ago that has collapsed. He owes about $400,000 to a group of people who are not gentle. He has been trying for the last 6 weeks to establish medical guardianship over his mother so that he could sell her house and the mineral rights on the land, which is being surveyed for a natural gas lease by a company out of Knoxville. The lease alone is worth about $600,000. If he can get her declared incompetent before she dies with a valid will. She already has a valid will, Nora said, from 2011. Bo found out today. Miss Vance closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were bright with something that looked almost like relief. Then he is going to lose on Monday, she said, and when he loses, he is going to come back here and try something worse. I need you to be ready for that, and I need you to have this. She reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out a small silver flash drive, and she set it on the kitchen table. That's every text message and email Randall sent me in the last 6 weeks, about his mother, about you, about the property, and about the men he owes. It is enough for the sheriff, and it is enough for the state bar, and it is enough for any county judge in the state of Tennessee. I made a copy for you because I am going to file for divorce on Wednesday, and I do not trust Randall's copies to survive that filing. Nora stared at her. Miss Vance. Delia? The woman said. She almost smiled. Please. And I am sorry. I am so sorry, Miss Whitlock. I sat at your kitchen table this morning and I said calculating things to a good woman about her dying grandmother, and I did it in a voice I have used 1,000 times, and I am ashamed of every word. Nora stood up. She did not know what came over her. She walked around the table and hugged Miss Delia Vance hard, and Miss Delia Vance hugged her back, and neither of them said anything for a minute or more. When Nora let go, Delia dabbed at her eyes with the back of her hand and said, I have to get back to Nashville tonight. I don't want him to know I was here. Please tell your grandmother, if she can hear you, that I am so sorry she ever had a son like him. She deserved so much better. She has a granddaughter, Nora said, and she has Bo, and she has Willow. It's all right, Delia. It really is all right. Delia's face crumpled for 1 second, and then she pulled herself back together, and then she was gone, headlights washing back down the driveway in the wet dark. Nora locked the door behind her and set the flash drive on the table next to the coffee tin, and she thought that if her grandmother could see the kitchen table right now, the tin full of envelopes for a 9-year-old boy, the manila folder from Cyrus Lattimore, the little silver flash drive from an estranged wife who had chosen truth over safety. Louise would smile that small, deep smile of hers and say, in her soft old voice, that people were, on the whole, better than you thought. She would probably say it, Nora thought, while stroking Willow's ears. The night deepened. Nora made herself a plate of buttered toast because it was all she could stomach. She carried it into the back bedroom and ate it in the wooden chair by the bed, watching her grandmother breathe. Willow lifted her head once, sniffed at the toast without interest, and lay back down. Around midnight, Louise stirred. Her eyes did not open, but her lips moved, and Nora leaned very close, and Louise whispered, "Baby, is he here?" "Uncle Randall?" "No." Louise's voice was so faint it was almost only breath. "The boy. Is Bo here?" Nora sat up. She reached for the phone on the nightstand. Bo answered on the second ring, from his own kitchen 300 yards away, across the wet field. He was at the front door in 4 minutes. Nora let him in and led him back to the bedroom without a word. Bo took his cap off at the doorway. He knelt beside the bed on the opposite side from Willow, and he took Louise's small, cold hand in his big, warm one, and he leaned close. "I'm here, Mum," he said. "It's Bo. I'm right here." Louise's eyes opened slowly for the last time. She looked at him. She smiled faintly. "There's my boy," she said. Bo put his forehead down on her hand and cried, and Nora, standing in the doorway, could not tell where her grandmother's tears stopped and Bo's started, and Willow lifted her head just once to look at both of them, and then laid it back down against Louise's chest and closed her amber eyes. They stayed like that for a long time. Bo said things Nora could not quite hear, small things, spoken directly against the back of Louise's hand. He told her about the shop and the cabinets he was building for a family up in Sweetwater, and the dogwood tree in his front yard that was going to bloom early this year. He told her the field had been full of fireflies last summer, thickest he had seen in years, and that Willow had chased them for hours and never caught a single one. He told her he was sorry he had never said thank you sooner. He told her he loved her quietly only once, in a voice that did not sound like a grown man's voice at all, and Louise's fingers tightened faintly in his. Louise slipped away from them slowly over the next 8 hours. Bo did not leave her side once. Around 3 in the morning, he walked back across the frozen field to his own house and came back carrying, of all things, a rocking chair. Marlene's rocking chair, the old maple one Marlene had loved, that had been sitting empty in Bo's front room for 3 years since she died. He set it up in the corner of the back bedroom. Nora asked him softly what it was for. Bo said, so there'd be a place where somebody who loved her could sit. Then he went back home again and came back a second time, carrying a big leather Bible that had been his grandfather's, and a small, silver-framed photograph of a young woman with dark hair and a nervous smile. My mama, he said, Ruth Hensley. I want her here for this. I think Louise would want her here for this. He set the photograph on the nightstand. Dr. Harlow came at dawn. He listened to Louise's heart for a long time, straightened up, and told them softly that it would be soon. He did not leave either. He sat in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee and a copy of the county paper, and every 20 minutes he came down the hall and put his stethoscope to Louise's chest and shook his head slowly and went back to the kitchen. Louise passed just before 6 in the morning. Her breathing slowed. It slowed some more. It hitched once, and then it simply, quietly stopped, and something in the room shifted, the way the air shifts when a wind that has been blowing all night finally dies down. Willow raised her head. She looked at Louise's face for a long, still moment. Then she leaned down and licked Louise's wrist once, very slowly. Then she laid her head back down and let out one long, low breath. Not a whine, not a whimper. Just a soft exhalation, like she was setting something down that had been very heavy to carry. She did not move again for nearly 2 hours. Nora and Bo sat with the body of the woman who had loved them both, and neither of them spoke. And outside the window, the last of the storm broke, and a thin, greyish morning light came in across the field. Bo kept his hand on Louise's hand for a long time. Then he stood up very carefully and walked into the kitchen and cried into a dish towel for about 10 minutes. And then he came back with his face washed and his cap in his hands and asked Nora what she needed him to do. Nora did not know, but he did. He called Otis Perry at the funeral home in Millbrook, a soft-spoken man who had known Louise all his life. He called Cyrus Lattimore. He called the church. He called Nora's cousin over in Cleveland and told her gently that Louise had gone. He made a pot of oatmeal and set a bowl in front of Nora and did not leave the kitchen until she had eaten every spoonful of it. Otis Perry arrived at 8 with his grown son and a stretcher, and they moved Louise with the kind of gentleness that made Nora, who had thought she had no tears left, cry quietly into Bo's shoulder for a solid minute. Willow watched them the whole time, unmoving. When they carried Louise out through the front door, Willow finally stood up, walked to the door, and stopped on the threshold. She did not go outside. She watched the black hearse pull away down Sycamore Lane. Then she turned around, walked back to the empty bed, climbed up onto it, laid herself down on top of the plaid wool blanket, and closed her eyes. She did not eat for 2 days. The county judge in Millbrook, a heavy, careful man named Judge Thurman Bledsoe, threw Randall Ackerman's petition out on Monday morning in about 4 minutes. Cyrus Lattimore stood up and presented Louise's 2011 will and the $22,000 waiver Randall had signed, and Louise's death certificate, dated 3 days earlier, and Judge Bledsoe raised his eyebrows exactly once, and then looked at Randall over the top of his half-moon reading glasses and asked whether counsel for the petitioner had any statement he cared to make. Randall's lawyer, who had clearly not been told about the waiver or the death certificate, mumbled something. Judge Bledsoe dismissed the petition and awarded Nora court costs, and told Randall, very quietly, that he was fortunate the state bar took longer to move than the county probate court, because if it were up to Judge Bledsoe, Randall would be turning in his license before lunch. Randall walked out of the courthouse without looking at Nora. He tried that evening to come back to the house on Sycamore Lane. Beau was on the porch when the black sedan pulled up. Beau did not raise his voice. He did not raise a hand. He simply stood on the top step in his work jeans and his flannel shirt with his cap in his hand, and he said very quietly that Randall was not welcome on this property, and that if Randall set one foot in the yard, Beau would call Sheriff Cal Rennick over in Millbrook, who happened to be Beau's fishing partner of 22 years, and Sheriff Rennick would be delighted to serve Randall with a copy of the trespass notice Cyrus Lattimore had filed that afternoon. Randall stood in the driveway for a long time. Then he got back in the black sedan and left. He did not come to the funeral. Delia Vance did. She sat in the last pew of the little Baptist church on Bethel Road, in a plain black dress, and she cried through the whole service. When it was over, she came up to Nora at the graveside and took Nora's hand and said softly that the flash drive was working its way through the appropriate channels, and that Randall would probably lose his law license within the year, and that the men he owed were being handled by other people who understood the situation and were prepared to be patient in exchange for information Randall could provide about the collapsed business venture. She said this quietly, without any satisfaction. Then she hugged Nora and left. Half the town came to the funeral. People Nora had not seen since she was a child came up to her at the graveside and told her stories she had never heard. About the winter Louise sat up all night with the preacher's wife when she lost her baby. About the summer Louise nursed old Mr. Halberd through his last cancer without ever sending a bill. About the time Louise took a homeless man in off Main Street in the middle of a January blizzard and let him sleep in the back bedroom until his sister could come get him from Nashville. Nora listened to all of it, standing in her black coat with her hair blowing in the cold air, and she understood, standing there, that she had known perhaps 1/10 of who her grandmother had been. Beau stood at Nora's shoulder for the entire service and did not once let go of her arm. Nora did not know, standing there by her grandmother's grave in the little Baptist cemetery, that Delia Vance would come back to Millbrook 6 months later, in the spring, and buy the little pharmacy on Main Street from Otis Perry's cousin, and turn it into a small clinic for elderly patients that she would name the Ackerman Hensley Care Center. She did not know that Delia would ask Nora to sit on the board. She did not know that the Ruth Hensley Scholarship at the Millbrook Community College would, within a year, put 4 young women through their first year of nursing school, and one of them would be a distant cousin of Nora's on her mother's side, a shy girl named Callie, who had lost her father to a farming accident when she was 14 and who had never dared say out loud that she wanted to be a nurse. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew, standing there at the graveside, that the little clapboard house on Sycamore Lane belonged to her now, and that Beau Hensley was standing beside her with his cap in his hands, and that somewhere across the field, a German shepherd named Willow was lying on top of a plaid wool blanket, waiting for someone to come home. They went back to the house after the funeral. The neighbors had brought food, casseroles and ham and biscuits and 3 kinds of pie, and the kitchen was full for a while, and then it got quiet, and then it got empty. Beau helped Nora wash the dishes. When they were done, Beau dried his hands on the yellow dish towel that Louise had embroidered 40 years ago and said softly that he thought he should go home now. He said Willow needed feeding. He said Nora should sleep. He said if she needed anything at all, she should call. Nora looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Bo, would you bring Willow back over, just for tonight? I don't want to sleep in this house alone yet." Bo put his cap on. He nodded. He walked home across the field. He came back an hour later, with Willow padding quietly at his heel, and with an old duffel bag over his shoulder, and with the shy, exhausted look of a man who had not been sure whether the offer would be extended a second time. Nora made up the guest room for him. She fed Willow a bowl of dry food, which Willow, for the first time in 3 days, actually ate. Willow drank a full bowl of water afterward and then walked without hesitation back to the empty bed in the back bedroom, climbed up onto it, and lay down on top of the plaid wool blanket. Nora and Bo sat at the kitchen table until midnight, drinking coffee, saying almost nothing. When they finally went to bed, Nora lay in her grandmother's old room and listened to the little house creak around her and thought about the 51 envelopes in the coffee tin and the scholarship in Ruth Hensley's name and the plaid wool blanket that a young nurse had wrapped around a scared little boy in a rented room above Dellard's pharmacy in the winter of 1964. She thought about Willow crossing the field in the storm. Somewhere in the small hours, she finally, deeply slept. Winter turned into spring on Sycamore Lane. Nora took a job at the county extension office in Millbrook, working with local farmers on grant paperwork, and she found she was surprisingly good at it. Bo finished a set of cabinets for the family up in Sweetwater and started on a barn conversion for a young couple who had moved out from Knoxville. Willow, who had been half wild in the weeks after Louise died, slowly came back to herself. She started following Nora out to the mailbox in the mornings. She started riding in the truck to the lumberyard again. She started stealing Bo's socks and hiding them under the porch, which Bo took as a very good sign indeed. Somewhere in the middle of March, Bo finally admitted one evening on the porch that his own house across the field had begun to feel like a barn full of nothing. He asked Nora carefully whether she might want a hand with the property. The fence needed a proper mending, the porch boards were rotting on the north side, the barn roof needed new tin. He said he could do it as a neighbor. He said he did not want to overstep. He said he would understand if she said no. Nora said, "Bo, why don't you just come live over here?" He turned his cap in his hands 3 times before he answered. Then he said softly, "That would suit me fine, Nora. That would suit me just fine." He moved his tools into the barn the next week. He kept his own house because he could not bear to sell it, but he slept in the guest room at Louise's house every night. And Willow slept every single night at the foot of the bed in the back bedroom, on top of the plaid wool blanket that no one, in the end, ever had the heart to wash. The blanket smelled still of cedar and rain and dog. They gave the coffee tin, in the end, to Cyrus Lattimore, and Cyrus put every dollar of it into the Ruth Hensley Scholarship at the community college in Millbrook, along with a handwritten letter of Louise's that had been folded at the bottom of the tin, dated the 15th of November 2021, addressed to whoever would find it. The letter was very short. It said, "To the boy from the rented room, or whoever loves him, I promised your mother the night before she passed that I would look after you as long as I had breath, and I meant it. This money is yours now, whether you take it as your own or give it to the next child who needs what you needed. I hope you have not been alone. I hope somewhere along the way you found a girl to love and a good dog to keep you honest. All my love, Louise Ackerman." Bo read that letter once, in Cyrus Lattimore's office, sitting in a leather chair with his cap on his knee. He read it slowly, moving his lips. When he was done, he folded it carefully and put it back on Cyrus's desk, and told Cyrus to keep it in the file with the scholarship trust, so that whichever nursing student won the money each year could read it and understand what they were being given and by whom. Then he walked back out to his truck and drove home to Sycamore Lane, and Willow was waiting for him on the porch when he pulled up. And Nora was standing in the kitchen doorway in her flannel shirt, and Bo realized, standing there in the driveway with his keys in his hand, that he had spent 51 years being wrapped in a plaid wool blanket by a woman he had barely known, and that all of that warmth had finally, in the end, come out into the light. Sometimes in the early morning, Nora would pass by the open door of the back bedroom and see Willow lying there, ears tipped forward, amber eyes fixed on the spot where Louise's face had been, as if she were still guarding her, as if she still knew somehow that the old woman was not entirely gone from that room. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, Bo would sit on the edge of the bed for a few minutes with his hand resting on Willow's head, and he would look at that plaid wool blanket, and Nora, watching from the hallway, would see the little boy from the rented room above the pharmacy in Millbrook, wrapped in his mother's death and in a stranger's kindness 51 winters ago. And she would understand, all over again, that some debts are paid across whole lifetimes, and some are paid by dogs, and some, in the end, are the very thing that ties us to each other and keeps us from being alone. Louise Ackerman had known that her whole life. She had spent 51 years paying a debt that was never a debt, saving small stacks of ones and fives in envelopes she never mailed, so that a little boy she had held in her arms one November night in 1964 would know someday that he had never really been alone in the world. She had built a scholarship in his dead mother's name and never spoken of it to anyone. She had let a German shepherd, who was not her dog, sit beside her rocking chair every morning for 6 months and never questioned it, because Louise had understood, in a way that most people never do, that love is not a thing you can hold on to with your fingers. It is a thing you let in through the door, and it comes and goes on its own schedule, and if you are wise, you make room. The blanket stayed on the bed. Willow, in the years that followed, would occasionally get up in the middle of the night, cross the hallway with her nails clicking softly on the hardwood, and stand for a few minutes in the doorway of Bo's room, where Bo slept with his cap on the bedpost and his boots by the door. She would look at him, he would lift his head from the pillow, he would say her name softly. She would wag her tail once and go back to the back bedroom and lie down again on the plaid wool blanket and close her amber eyes and sleep. She died on a warm July afternoon 4 years later, at the very old age of 13, with her head in Nora's lap and Bo's hand on her chest and the plaid wool blanket folded under her chin. Bo buried her at Nora's request at the foot of Louise's grave in the Little Baptist Cemetery on Bethel Road. They put a small stone marker there. The marker said simply, "She came home." Nora understood, standing beside it in the summer heat with Bo's arm around her shoulders, what her grandmother had meant that night in the back bedroom, when she had opened her eyes and smiled and said the very same words. She had not been talking only about the dog. She'd been talking about the long, quiet coming home of everything she had loved and let go of and waited for. The little boy in the rented room, and the plaid wool blanket, and the man who had grown up to build the fence he never fixed, and the granddaughter who had driven all night down the highway through the rain, and the shepherd who had crossed a field in a storm because someone, somewhere, needed to be warm. That was Louise Ackerman's whole life, spelled out in 6 words on a small stone in the shade of a dogwood tree in a Baptist cemetery in Millbrook, Tennessee. If this story moved you tonight, take a moment to leave a comment about the moment that stayed with you the most. Share it with someone who could use a reminder that there are still good people in this world. Hit that like button so more folks can find it, and subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next story we bring you. There are still kind hands in the middle of the night, and blankets that carry more warmth than the wool they are made of, and dogs who know things we cannot begin to explain. Thank you for listening. Take care of the people you love, and the ones you have not met yet, because you never really know who is waiting on the other side of the field. We will see you in the next one.